Hello, and welcome to a ChessMaster Chess. Today we will relax by the fireside as I will try to entertain you with the fascinating story that is the history of computer chess. It's going to be a long video, guys, because this story begins 250 years ago. And we will travel with the great inventors through history and learn about the development of artificial intelligence in chess. I got the idea for this video while reading Deep Thinking by Kasparov on Blinkist, which is why I'm really happy that I actually got them to come in and sponsor this video. So if you don't know, Blinkist is a way to understand powerful ideas in just 15 minutes. They do these super condensed versions of books, basically, so you can grasp key concepts very quickly. I use it all the time, so I'm super happy about this sponsorship. Right now, Blinkist has a special offer just for our audience, so you can click in the link in the description to start a free 7-day trial with Blinkist and get 25% off a premium membership. So thanks to Blinkist for making this video possible. To start our story, we must travel 250 years back in time to the Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna, where noblemen and noble ladies had gathered to witness something extraordinary. Wolfgang von Kempelen was about to unveil something absolutely amazing. He presented the Mechanical Turk. You can see it here from a movie that was later made. And he claimed it was an automaton that was able, through a very intricate mechanical construction, to play chess. Kempelen addressed the court, presenting what he had built, and began the demonstration of the machine and its parts. He opened the doors, he opened the drawers of the cabinet. He allowed the members of the audience to inspect the machine. And then he would ask for a challenger. This is the first instance we have of somebody conceiving of the idea that something mechanical, something not alive, should be able to play the royal game of chess. The machine was, of course, a hoax. There was an operator cleverly hidden inside the machine. The operator was a strong chess player. People marveled at this. It was a huge, huge hit. And just to give you a sense of just how popular the Turk was, I'll show you a game that it played in 1809. Again, at the Schönbrunn Palace. It had toured Europe by this point, but it was back in Schönbrunn Palace. And it played Napoleon Bonaparte. So when we say that chess has a rich history, there really is something to that. And then Napoleon had the white pieces and opened with e4. We saw e5. And what do you think this military and strategical genius played on his second move? That's right, Queen f3, going for checkmate on f7. And I'll just show this feeble attempt at a scholar's mate to give you a sense that Napoleon was maybe not a chess genius, although he was a strategical military genius. And you can see how his king is getting swarmed. The Turk is winning a lot of tempos against him, and a sacrifice that cannot be accepted. The queen comes in, and the end is very near. The queen goes, and just a little bit of precision is required. First we check to capture the rook, then position the knight for checkmate, chop off the defending knight, and that is how one of the greatest military minds ever was brought to his knees against the Mechanical Turk. Another, and to our story, far more important person who played the Mechanical Turk was a man called Charles Babbage, who played the machine in 1819. He was a famed engineer and mathematician. He played the Turk twice and lost both matches. And Babbage, who was quite brilliant, suspected that the automaton was not intelligent, so to say, but merely an elaborate hoax, concealing a person who was somehow controlling the Turk's movement from inside, which was, of course, accurate. That was exactly how it worked. But Babbage, he had an idea to create something that could do something really intelligent, and something that was not a hoax. He wanted to construct the difference engine, as he called it, which was basically the first calculator. And he worked on it throughout his life. He got more and more ambitious. He then switched out his design, and he never actually got to build his calculator because it was simply too big of an undertaking. But he corresponded with another very important person for our story about his thoughts of building something mechanical that can do something intelligent. It can calculate, it can subtract sums, it can divide, it can do stuff that previously it was only thought that humans could ever do. And the person he corresponded with was Ada Lovelace, who also has an absolutely fascinating story. And she realized that Charles Babbage's ideas could be generalized. In other words, she conceived of the idea of the general purpose computer based on Charles Babbage's designs. And Babbage himself wrote that someday, maybe a machine like the one he had been working on and discussed with Ada Lovelace. Maybe one day such a machine could play chess. And with that, we will leave Ada and Charles in England in the 1800s, where they belong, and travel to Spain in the 1900s. In 1914, a Spanish inventor named Leonardo Torres y Quevedo unveiled something amazing, because he had actually built what the Turk claimed that it was, or what von Kempelen claimed that he had built with the Turk. Because Leonardo had built an actual chess automaton, purely mechanically. The game states were checked with magnets, and the machine, it is just a marvel to behold, was able to play out rook endgames. And it didn't play the best or the fastest checkmate, but it would always win in these simple endgames that it was able to play. And it is just absolutely amazing to look at this. And you could make a case that this is actually the first, not only the first functioning chess automaton, but also the first computer game in history. It all started with chess, of course. The machine was called El Ajedrista, which means the chess player. It's quite fitting. And it could even move the pieces itself. So it was a very impressive feat by Leonardo Torres. But of course, these king and rook endgames that it could play was only a tiny, tiny fraction of the full game of chess. So let's travel back to England and talk a little bit about a man that we absolutely have to mention when we talk about artificial intelligence. We are turning our attention to the British war hero of the Second World War, and mathematician Alan Turing, who today is famous for breaking the German Enigma code and helping win the war, and for conceiving of the idea to build what we today would call a computer. The most significant theoretical framework for the computer was conceived by this man, this hero. He's not so famous for his chess, but in fact he wrote the very first chess engine. It was called TuroChamp, and it was written in 1948, after the war. He finally had some time to himself, so he thought, well, I invented this idea of a computer, what can I have it do? He was so interested in how a machine could think. So of course he wrote a chess program. Now, at this point, nobody had actually been able to build a working general purpose computer that you could program. So while Alan Turing was waiting for somebody to catch up with his ideas, he wrote this program on paper. and then he carried out the calculations, the computations, by hand. So he wrote an entire chess engine, and then he played as the computer himself against a friend. And for every time he had to make a move, he had to go through the entire program. It would take him 15 minutes or something to actually calculate what the move he had to play was according to the program. And the original program has unfortunately been lost, but we have some games that it played, and based on those, some people have been able to reverse engineer it. And on what would have been Alan Turing's 100th birthday, his program TuroChamp played Kasparov, and we actually have that on video, which is quite amazing. So let's just take a look. Here in the chair, by the way, the guy who gets up now, that's Frederick Friedel, founder of ChessBase, another part of our history later. And you can see Kasparov is playing black here and just demolishing poor TuroChamp. But the program ran at 2-ply. That means it calculated 2 moves ahead, which was how Turing had written it. You can see now that's checkmate. But in principle, you could set it to calculate further ahead, no problem. And Kasparov estimates that it could play at even maybe like a 1600 level if it went like 10-ply, if it was allowed to calculate for 10-ply. Yeah, so that is just absolutely amazing that besides all the other stuff that Alan Turing did for us, he also wrote the first chess engine. Just a year later, in 1949, across the pond in the United States, a man called Claude Shannon published the most important scientific paper in the history of computing chess. It was simply called Programming a Computer for Playing Chess. The paper was presented at the National Institute for Radio Engineers convention in New York. And in it, he described how to program a computer to play chess based on position scoring, based on move selection, stuff like this. And he proposed basic strategies for restricting the number of possibilities to be considered in a game of chess. His process for having the computer decide on which move to make was a minimax procedure based on an evaluation function of a given chess position. Shannon gave a rough example of an evaluation function in which the value of the black position was subtracted from that of the white position. So what you do is you give points to each piece, and he just used the usual chess relative value, that is 1 point for a pawn, 3 points for a knight or a bishop, 5 points for a rook, and 9 points for a queen. And then you count up the material on each side. The computer will count up the material on each side and subtract black number from white's number, and that numerical value will be the baseline for how good the computer thinks that the position is. And they will then look forward to see if it can increase its material advantage. And that's a very, very unsophisticated way to do it, but he also considered some positional factors. For instance, he was subtracting half a point for each doubled pawn, also for each backward pawn and for each isolated pawn. And mobility of the pieces was incorporated by adding 0.1 point for each legal move available. So this may not sound as much, or maybe if you're not like a math kind of person, it sounds like a whole lot. But this is the basis of almost all chess computers ever since. This idea of having the computer turn the position into basically a simple equation, like just adding and subtracting, really. Claude Shannon also came up with the famous Shannon Number, which you may have heard of, and it estimates the number of possible chess games to be 10 to the 120th power. That number is, if you don't know this sort of notation, that number is basically bigger than anything you can possibly imagine. It's bigger than the number of atoms in the universe. It's bigger than absolutely everything. And why was this significant? Well, this is significant because what's tough about chess is that even though the rules are so simple, you see the rules, they are so simple, but the complexity is so enormous that it is not possible generally to calculate to any terminal game state. You can't calculate all the way to a position where you are 100% sure that you are winning. And that makes it really hard for humans to play, but also for computers, because we can look one move ahead, 2 moves ahead, 3 moves ahead, but when we get beyond that, the amount of positions that the computer will have to calculate will just be so high. Like the amount is just so unfathomably high that even today the computers are not calculating anything close to that. This was also about the time where actual computers were starting to be built. So remember, this is a long time ago. If I say computer now, the image that you get in your head is probably very different from what these early machines looked like. They had no screens, they had no keyboards, they certainly had no mouse. They were these huge, noisy electromechanical constructions. One of those was the mathematical analyzer, numerical integrator, and automatic computer at Los Alamos. And if you're wondering about the weird name, it was chosen because it is the acronym of MANIAC. Scientists and engineers really had a thing for silly acronyms at the time. And in 1956, a team of scientists programmed the MANIAC to play chess, sort of. Due to the limited amount of memory and computing power of the machine, they had developed a chess variant that was played on a smaller board of 6 by 6 instead of the real chessboard that is 8 by 8. The MANIAC was the first ever electrical computer to beat a human in a form of chess. So it's very historically significant for that. It defeated a lab assistant who had just learned the rules of chess. And what's really amazing is that we still have that game. So let's just take a look at that. Okay, so you can see here there are no bishops. They called this either Los Alamos chess or anti-clerical chess, because there are no bishops, because they had to play on this very small board here. The MANIAC program opens the game up with just this simple pawn move here, And yeah, it looks weird to look at chess like this. And I'll just go through the game here. You can see it's really tough to even try to evaluate what's going on because it's not really chess, but it's still quite interesting. So this move was apparently a mistake, and basically the human should have been able to get an advantage here, but because he was a new guy, he just learned the rules, and maybe also because it's a weird chess variant, he didn't play the best attack from here against the computer. So the computer starts just pushing this pawn, probably because it's somewhere in its program it says, the closer the pawn is to the back rank, the more points I have, and it's not able to calculate to any significant depth. So what's the problem? Well, it has no idea that the pawn is just going to be captured by black here. So it tries to come in with the queen. There's a check, and we see here the loss of the pawn and an exchange of the pieces. Now, black is threatening checkmate in 1, and the machine sees that and protects. The human is just fiddling about with his rook, and now the machine wins a pawn here. There's a check, and from here we actually see that the computer is actually playing quite well. So here we could maybe even have made a knight with check, but the queen is probably the best. And check, and you can see that it's actually just playing the quickest checkmate here. And do you see the move? Do you see how a human was first beaten in chess by a machine? It's checkmate like that with the knight. So isn't that just absolutely amazing that we have that game? I mean, how cool is that? Okay, back to the story. Now let's, after this game, let's talk a little bit about the term artificial intelligence. Where does that term really come from? The same year, 1956, that a computer first beat a human in chess, a man named John McCarthy held a conference about computers and published a paper where he coined the term artificial intelligence. Some 8 years later, that same man, that computer scientist, John McCarthy, were at a party with a chess player called David Levy. And McCarthy invited Levy to play a game of chess, which Levy won. Because Levy is an international master, and he's still alive, by the way. He's an expert on computer chess. You'll learn why in a second. I have a book he wrote on the subject. McCarthy responded to his loss in chess against David Levy, saying that, quote, "You might be able to beat me, but within 10 years there will be a computer program that can beat you." And Levy suggested that they bet on it. Other AI experts signed on later, and the total bet reached £1,250. So David Levy could win a lot of money if he, for 10 years, would go undefeated against chess computers. 5 years later, Levy wrote, "Clearly, I shall win my bet in 1978, and I would still win if the period were to be extended for another 10 years. Prompted by the lack of conceptual progress over more than 2 decades, I am tempted to speculate that a computer program will not gain the title of international master before the turn of the century, and that the idea of an electronic world champion belongs only in the pages of a science fiction book." Well, he played many matches against computers over these 10 years, and he won them all convincingly. But that does not mean that progress was not being made. So, let's go to the first World Computer Chess Championship held in 1974, so we can get a sense of how smart the artificial intelligence was by then. Here we have a very interesting game. We see the American US program Ostrich, named so because the programmers said that it played like an ostrich. It put its head in the sand, oblivious to danger. This program played against the Soviet program KAISSA, and KAISSA ended up winning the event with a perfect score. And KAISSA was a very sophisticated program for its time. It was the first program to use something called bitboards. It contained an actual opening books. It had 10,000 pre-programmed moves that it could choose from in the opening stage of the game, and it used a novel algorithm for move pruning. Now, move pruning is a very interesting mathematical concept that is key to all chess programs. And I was thinking, drop a comment if you want me to explain basically the core concept in a mathematical way, how a computer plays chess. I think it could be worthwhile and very interesting for you, because this idea of move pruning is actually on a conceptual level quite easy to understand, and it is very useful to know, because this is at the core of a lot of artificial intelligence today. So yeah, drop a comment if you want me to make a video where I explain that. Also, the KAISSA program, it could search during the opponent's move. It used the null move heuristic. It introduced that. It had sophisticated algorithms for time management. So all of this is, of course, common in modern computer chess programs, but was new in 1974, and it allowed KAISSA to win this first World Chess Computer Championship, or World Computer Chess Championship. Here we are with Ostrich with white against KAISSA with black, and I'll just show you two positions of interest. So the first one is right here in the opening, where this move here. So first, KAISSA developed the bishop to e7, and then after knight c3, it just moved it again to c3, which is a completely pointless move. So you can see, even though it did have an opening book and it was advanced for its time, it had no real concept of chess principles, even something as simple as not moving the same piece twice in the opening for no reason at all. It didn't know. That's the first thing I'd like to touch upon. And then here, let's see. Yes, here we are. Here, Ostrich, KAISSA played rook to d8, which is a gigantic blunder, because this actually allows just rook takes 8-6, and this is a checkmate in 11 moves. It's a forced checkmate in 11 moves. So, and today it's unfathomable that a computer could miss a checkmate like this. Also because it's there's only one move here. It's g takes, And now you play bishop f5, and technically there's still 9 moves to checkmate, but if you look at this position, black doesn't have any way to stop it. Like, it can prolong the game with just ridiculous moves like knight check, that you just give up the knight to prolong the game 1 more move. You give up the queen to just prolong the game 1 more move. It's very, very clear that that white is just winning this so easily. Yeah, the computers, I just wanted to show so you would get a sense, that they tactically, they were not that strong back then, because they just couldn't calculate very far. And a move like rook takes here, that wins by force, would be discarded very quickly because it lost material, and since there were no checkmate in like 2 moves, the computer couldn't understand why it would sacrifice material, because it couldn't look deep enough. I'll just show you sort of the final couple of moves of the game. So we are in an endgame like this, and you can see that KAISSA has managed to just get a winning pawn endgame here, and can queen, and the game is over now with checkmate like this. So that was 1974. So we go to 1977 now for our next important position in the history of computer chess. So here it's KAISSA again with black playing Duchess, different chess computer. And Duchess has just given a check here on the back rank, and Duchess has an absolutely 100% winning position. And here we see a very important move. KAISSA plays rook to e8. And they actually thought, the programmers and the engineers, they thought that this was a bug. It was a mistake, because obviously we can just capture the rook like this, and it looks like we gained nothing from that. And it was later found, much later actually, that this is the only move to avoid a very, very cunning checkmate idea that white has. Because the commentators and the experts at the venue, they thought that black should of course just play king g7 here. But that is a checkmate in 5 for white. Can you find it? What is the move that KAISSA found that none of the humans could find, that loses the game immediately, or wins the game for white rather? What is the move that KAISSA wanted to prevent by playing rook to e8 instead of king g6, king g7 rather? Can you see it? It's a nice queen sacrifice. Queen check, king takes, only move. Do you see the follow-up? Bishop check. Look how nicely these bishops just cuts off the king. And now we throw a check again, and you can put stuff in the way, but it's not going to work. Check and mate. So this marks the first point in computer chess history where a computer was able to reason on a higher level than the human experts. We must note, of course, that these experts we talk about they are primarily computer scientists and not particularly strong chess players, even though they program chess computers. Any chess grandmaster would of course find the mate in the blink of an eye. Still, it was very telling for what was to come. Now, enter another giant of computer history, Ken Thompson, who developed the C programming language and the Unix operating system, along with Dennis Ritchie in the 70s. In 1980, his purpose-built chess computer, Bell, named after Bell Labs, where he worked, which is named after Alexander Graham Bell, who started the company, would win the Computer World Chess Championship. So in 1980, Bell won the World Chess Championship for computers. And Ken contributed in many ways to the development of chess AI. But his most significant contribution was to introduce a whole new philosophy to solving chess. You see, he was among the pioneers of chess tablebases. What is that? Well, all the ideas we've seen so far involves the computer looking forward and searching for good moves in a given position. Now, tablebases are the opposite. They look backwards. Take the simple king and rook versus king endgame that Leonardo Torres y Quevedo's chess automaton was able to play back in 1914. You set up some checkmate situation, and then you calculate backwards. So you start at checkmate, some checkmate situation, and then you go backwards. You ask yourself, from how many positions can I force this position in one move? When you have the results, you iterate the search, meaning you ask, okay, then from what positions can I force that position in one move? And in that way, you work backwards as far as you can. And ever since their inception, people have worked on expanding the tablebases. And this work is ongoing still to this day. In 2022, we have now reached 7-piece tablebases, meaning that any position with 7 or fewer pieces can be accurately evaluated to a win, loss, or draw. There are some sets of 8 pieces tablebases, but with every piece we add, the complexity increases exponentially. So we are in no way close to solving chess completely with this method. It is still extremely useful for a modern chess engine to calculate its way to some endgame, and then instead of calculating further, it just look up the evaluation in this tablebase with 100% accuracy. Now these tablebases, they also revealed how limited our understanding of the game of chess really is. Many positions that were thought to be unwinnable has been proven to be a win for one side. With the longest forced checkmate we have found, the longest forced checkmate is 549 moves. 549 moves. Another important contributor to the development of tablebases, a scientist called Tim Krabbe, he noted that playing over these moves is an eerie experience. They are not human. A grandmaster does not understand them any better than someone who has learned chess yesterday. The knights jump, the kings orbit, the sun goes down, and every move is the truth. It's like being revealed the meaning of life, but it's in Estonian. So Magnus Carlsen, the current world champion, he has echoed a similar sentiment. Now we go to 1988, which marks a bit of a departure from our main narrative. So far, we've been talking about advances in artificial intelligence made by computer scientists and engineers on highly specialized or incredibly expensive hardware. But in 1988, Software Toolworks, that's a company, released their title ChessMaster 2100 for the Apple II. The Apple II was a home computer used by ordinary people. It is also the foundation for Apple that makes the iPhone and the iMacs and all of that. That was all built on the Apple II, the success of the Apple II, the brilliant design by Steve Wozniak. But the fact that you could now play chess against an artificial intelligence on your home computer, this whole new concept of a home computer, meant that chess AI was no longer exclusive to the computer scientists. Now anybody could play, not anybody, but many people, many ordinary people could play against a silicon mind. The ChessMaster series went on to be the best-selling consumer chess software of all time, bringing the ideas of Babbage, Turing, and Shannon into the homes of millions and millions of people around the world. And this, I show you here, this is the intro sequence of ChessMaster 9000. It shows how chess has traveled through history and connected minds many centuries apart. The same 64 squares, the same pieces, the same rules, connecting the minds through history. And now, with computer chess, this connection of minds gets infused with ideas from logic, mathematics, engineering, and philosophy to create something truly remarkable. And back in 1988, people were slowly beginning to realize that computers were here to stay. So the pawns were now invited to the party of chess AI. But the kings and queens of computer science were still working on the big game, making a chess AI that could beat the best human player in the world. Feng Shuingshu had an idea. He wanted to build a computer chip based exactly on the 64 squares of the chessboard. And he did so. Working with Murray Campbell and others, he managed to realize this project and build Deep Thought, a special purpose chess computer that could generate and analyze a staggering 700,000 moves per second. And the key to this was that all the transistors in the chip were mapped out. There were 64 on an 8x8 grid. So he basically mimicked the game of chess directly on the silicon. In 1989, 1 year after the release of ChessMaster, the machine was ready to challenge Garry Kasparov, the reigning world champion and perhaps the best chess player to ever push a pawn. Deep Thought and Kasparov played a 2-game match, which the general public showed a great interest in. And that's like, people were really interested in this. And this goes back to what I talked about earlier. At this point, humankind was slowly beginning to realize that artificial intelligence would soon become a part of our everyday lives. Psychologically, and even existentially, this was a very big deal. eliciting a lot of emotion and excitement. And I'd like to play this short clip with a psychologist talking about the match.
These same emotions have been aroused whenever one talks about computers thinking. And that in turn has seemed to me to have something to do with the fact that many human beings seem to get their feeling of dignity, worth, self-respect out of some notion that the human species is different from everything else, from some idea of uniqueness. And of course, then if you take away some kind of uniqueness, that's very upsetting. And I guess there were some guys who were very upset when Galileo said, or Copernicus, you know, you aren't right in the center of things.
In the end, though, deep thought proved to be no match for the mighty Kasparov, who won the match 2-0. But the creators of deep thought were picked up by the computer giant IBM and said, okay, you had some success here. We can see that your program, although it lost, and your machine, although it lost, it played some, it was really interesting. You can have some more money. And then for 6 years, they spent that money working on a serious upgrade to deep thought. While they were working on this, a different use of computer chess technology came to the forefront of professional human chess. That's something called chess databases. In 1993, we saw the release of the now ubiquitous PGN-file. PGN stands for Portable Game Notation. And this was a way for computers to store chess games along with notes, information about the particular game, about the players, and other points of interest. When it was played, where it was played. And this sounds maybe trivial, but this really revolutionized the chess world, since the professional players could now build huge libraries of games, allowing them to analyze their opponents and their openings much more effectively and much, much deeper than ever before. Interestingly, it was not a computer scientist who came up with this idea, but instead it was a chess player. In 1985, Garry Kasparov had visited Frederick Friedel and told him that a chess database would make it much easier for him to prepare for specific opponents. And Friedel turned this idea into ChessBase, a chess database program which professional and amateur players alike use to prepare for their opponents to this very day in 2022. Now we reach 1996. The IBM team behind Deep Thought were ready to challenge Kasparov again. Feng Shuingshu's chip design had been turned into a massive supercomputer named Deep Blue. The name was a reference to IBM's nickname Big Blue. And Deep Blue was a silicon behemoth. It's a huge machine, and it was able to calculate, are you ready, 100 million positions per second. Let's take a look at how this allowed it to play. This is the first game of our 6-game match that Deep Blue played against Kasparov. And Deep Blue had the white pieces here. So here we are in game 1. Deep Blue with the white pieces has just played Queen c5. And Black has a weird pawn structure. But actually, Black enjoys a small edge here. Nothing substantial, but it's most grandmasters would prefer to have Black here. And here Kasparov should have played rook to d8, just sitting on the position. This pawn is attacked, let's defend it, sit on the position, and it will probably peter out to a draw, but there could be some practical chances. Instead he played d4, and this was because he had calculated a long attacking line where he wants to basically make an attack against White's king. So in 1996, Kasparov wanted to out-calculate the silicon monster that could calculate 100 million positions per second. And let's take a look here at how the game ended. So Deep Blue picks up the pawn, and Kasparov's happy, he wants to mobilize. You can see all these pieces here looking at the White king. Now there is f3, and the problem is that it just doesn't work. Here it was supposed to be a very big advantage, but Deep Blue had calculated all the way to the end, and knight takes f7 here is just basically the end of the game. So there's a discovered check from the rook, and check, and Kasparov resigned. This was the first time a computer had beaten the reigning world chess champion. And Deep Blue didn't have a very sophisticated understanding of chess. It didn't have a strong opening book, and it was not able to learn from its own games. It was basically not able to do anything other than what the programmers had already built in. It was, however, still a very, very strong chess player, simply because of its massive parallel processing power. The match between Kasparov and Deep Blue was a series of 6 games, and Kasparov seemed strangely untroubled by his loss in the first game, and this was due to the fact that he had tried to outcalculate the computer, and he had fallen prey to a forced tactical sequence. But he was confident in his chess understanding, and because of this, the world champion switched gears, stopped trying to outcalculate the computer, but instead adopted a strategy that allowed him to utilize his superior intuition and conceptual understanding of the game. And this new strategy allowed him to win 3 games and draw 2 for a very, very convincing 4-2 match victory. So, was this the end of computer chess? Surely, if it is not enough to calculate 100 million positions per second, then there's no hope for the computers. On the contrary, and already the next year, Deep Blue was ready to face Kasparov again. In 1997, a massively upgraded Deep Blue, nicknamed Deeper Blue, played Kasparov for another 6-game match. The machine was now able to calculate 200 million positions per second. In addition, the machine had its chess understanding fine-tuned by actual chess grandmasters, most notably Joel Benjamin. It also had its opening book significantly improved by experts, most notably Grandmaster Nick DeFermian, who is famous for his book series Modern Chess Openings. The match was highly televised, and it may be the most watched chess match in history. Let's take a look at the first game. You see Kasparov with white here, playing a hyper-modern style. And what I want you to notice is that he's not putting any pieces beyond the third rank. He's playing like a turtle. So why is he doing this? It's because he wants to have a closed position with no tactical options, like no tactical shots for the computer, where he can just sit on the position for many, many, many moves until the computer will eventually make a mistake because it just has no idea how to play the position, because there's no forced tactical sequence it can go for. So he's playing for small, small, small advantages. And you can see he sacrificed the exchange, and now he just has these 2 pawns that the computer was not able to stop in time or understand that it had to stop, and they are just marching down the board and they are going to queen, and there's nothing that Deep Blue can do about it. So he won the first game. And it looked like Kasparov and his anti-computer strategy could not be stopped. But already in the second game, disaster struck for the human. This game is probably the most important and fascinating game of chess that has ever been played. So I have made an entire video about just that game that I recommend you watch if you have the time. For the purpose of this video and the history of computer chess, I'll just show this one position and talk about this one moment. Now, Deep Blue plays A takes B. And Kasparov is very pleased after he plays A takes B himself. Because here he had calculated a very nice computer trap. Here the machine will play queen to b6, hitting the pawn and the bishop. It will be able to win 2 pawns or a bishop, and that is what computers want. That's how they are programmed. They search millions of positions looking for the ones where they have more pieces than their opponent, and then they play the moves needed to get to those positions. But Kasparov has a trap, because after queen b6 he can allow Deep Blue to go up material, and while it is wasting its time capturing pieces, he can go all in for a perpetual check against the king and get a draw. He's already up 1 game in the match, so a draw with the black pieces would be just perfect here. But Deep Blue did not play queen to b6 here. And this is where Deep Blue passed the Turing test. It played bishop to e4. This move is patient. It's not taking any material. It's positional. This is a positional move. It's a strategical move. And it is a winning move. Nobody in the world knows chess better than Garry Kasparov. And he could not believe that the machine was able to play such an intelligent move. For years, he was convinced that the Deep Blue team was actually cheating and had a human player help the computer. This game broke Kasparov, and showed one of the weaknesses we humans have, psychology. Kasparov was so devastated by this loss that he wasn't able to play his best chess. 3 draws followed, and in the final game he played a dubious line trying to trick the computer. He lost horribly, and with that he lost the match. And this match was a turning point in human history. Today we are no longer surprised when AI turns out to be superior to humans in various ways. It happens all the time. In fact, we count on it. We have our smartphones solve all kinds of problems for us, and we want it to be better and smarter than us in these areas. But in 1997, this was an existential shock to the world. In fact, the story is maybe a little bit misleading in a way, because most experts actually rate Kasparov as the stronger player between Deep Blue and Kasparov himself. For instance, Nick DeFermian, the guy who did the openings for Deep Blue, he said that Kasparov's anti-computer strategy was fundamentally flawed, and that he would have gotten much better results if he had just played his normal openings. But Kasparov was so afraid of having to compete with the computer in calculation that he wanted to circumvent us, like sort of trick it out of all its area of expertise. But in reality, that meant that in many games he just got suboptimal openings, had a bad position out of the opening, and it was tough for him to convert or turn those into wins. Kasparov wanted a rematch, but IBM, they were done. They have proven that they could do it, so they said no more chess for us. Still, the world champion was able to sort of redeem himself. 6 years later, in 2003, he played 2 matches against the strongest chess computers at that time. So, of course, chess technology had developed in these 6 years, and we had 2 computers, one named Deep Fritz, that was actually made by the company of Kasparov's friend Frederick Friedel of ChessBase. And we had Deep Junior, an Israeli supercomputer that was programmed to play chess. The first match Kasparov played was against Deep Fritz. It was a 4-game match. They won 1 game each and had 2 draws, so the match was a draw. And Kasparov also played a 6-game match against the other Deep Junior, and that match also was drawn. They won a game each, and there were 4 draws. So now, of course, the computers are better than the best humans, but it's a little misleading probably to say that 1997 was the year where this turning point happened technologically. It was going to happen, it was very close to happening, but Kasparov lost probably because of his nerves, not because that chess computers had actually overtaken us yet. And with that, I'm going to start my conclusion of this little sleepomentary on the first part of computer chess history. So a lot has happened since 2003. A lot of very important things, really. I'll briefly touch upon it here. And then, if you want, I'll make a video on the second part, on the modern chess era. By about 2008, the best chess engines were now better than the best humans, even when running on consumer hardware like a home computer. They were still beatable. Nakamura beat the best one in blitz matches sometimes and stuff. So they were still beatable, but they were better than the best humans. And from about 2013, the open source program Stockfish has been dominating the rankings. It still does, and it plays at absolutely superhuman strength. Now, I don't think even Magnus Carlsen could get even a draw against Stockfish. Well, that's too much. He could probably get a draw, particularly with white, but he could also lose, and he'll never win. But in 2017, something extraordinary happened that I probably should make an entire video on. DeepMind, a company owned by Google, published a paper detailing how their program AlphaZero had beaten Stockfish, and that is the strongest chess entity in the world, in a 100-game match with the unbelievable score of 28 wins, 72 draws, and 0 losses. 0 losses. And what's even more mind-blowing about this is that AlphaZero used an entirely new approach from all the other chess computers we had seen so far. This was a neural network. It had not been programmed with chess knowledge. It had only been taught how to play the game. And then it had played itself 44 million times. 44 million times. And had taught itself. So it's basically like evolution. Every time a game is done, it changes a little bit in its code. It makes a sort of a child program, and it has that program play against the last version of itself. If the sort of random mutation, not completely random, but if the mutation it has made was beneficial in some way, well, they would then take that new version and spawn a mutation from that, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. That's the very basic explanation of what it is, but that's the basic idea. And that is about where we are now. We don't have access to AlphaZero, but some enthusiasts created a community replicating the science and the mathematics behind this, and we now have Leela Chess Zero modeled on this same neural network. And Leela Chess and Stockfish, they're competing all the time to see, and to see who's the best. And it's very, very, very interesting. And the story continues, of the fascinating story of chess artificial intelligence. And if you found my story of computer chess interesting, and if you would like a more detailed explanation of what has been going on in the past 2 decades, please let me know in the comments, and I will make 1 or more videos on that subject. I hope that you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching.